Sorry, assholes, your quiet day at the office is about to get severely fucked up.
Guys, welcome back to the After Action Review. You know me, I'm Nick Guy, the world's most okayest Green Beret. And as usual, we have more than okay guests on. Joining us is Chief Warrant Officer Mike Durant. You guys are excited to hear his story. I know you guys, there's a lot of hype following this, but you guys know his story. You've seen the movie Black Hawk Down. Hopefully you've read the book by Mark Bowden. But the story kind of ends with Mike being captured. And I think this is a really good opportunity to kind of hear that story in captivity. It's something that's rare nowadays in modern combat, modern warfare. You don't really see a whole lot of POWs. So when you get a chance to speak with one, you take the opportunity. So Chief, thank you so much for joining us.
Nick, my pleasure.
So, I mean, kind of just, let's take it from the beginning, just the shoot down. I mean, what happened? How did you find yourself in that situation?
Yeah, so obviously the battle had progressed pretty significantly by the time we rolled back in. We dropped our chalk of Rangers off. I was the flight lead of the Ranger blocking force, and we had put our 4 aircraft in, dropped our customers off, and we were holding north of the city. And at that point, theoretically, my job was done because we were going to extract largely using ground vehicles. So we were essentially a contingency asset at that point. And then Super 6-1 got shot down, and the commander called me and wanted me to replace them over the target. And the aircraft was being used as a sniper / close-in fire support platform. In hindsight, probably not a good idea, but it had been effective up to that point, and it was really only on that mission where it became obvious that this is a little bit too high risk in a urban environment like that. But anyway, I flew in, replacing 6-1, got into orbit, and we didn't have snipers on board, so we were going to use our miniguns. And that to shoot a minigun in a close-in situation like that, you can't be flying fast. I mean, you got to be flying fairly slow so you can see what's happening in the alleyways and in between the buildings. So we're probably going 50 knots and in a very tight orbit with another Black Hawk Super 6-2. So there's 2 of us sort of 180 out from each other. And there was little birds up overhead, and still stuff happening all over the place. And we made it around the pattern about 3 times when we got hit by an RPG. And the initial impact, I always describe it as hitting a speed bump in a parking lot. If you go, over a speed bump at 25 miles an hour, and you feel that jolt in the car, that's what it felt like when the RPG hit the aircraft. We didn't see it hit us in the tail, and but knew obviously we didn't hit because it was that significant of a jar of the airframe. And I was flying, I rolled out, look around, do what pilots do, kind of looked at the instruments, made sure the thing was still flyable, and it was. Everything seemed normal. So my initial plan was to go back to the airfield because we're within really 3 minutes flight time of the airfield. I could see it. We just happened to be pointed straight at it. So I sort of set my sights on that, and within seconds, the tail rotor just disintegrated. And, that's a bad thing. Whether you're a helicopter pilot or not, I think you recognize we need those things on the aircraft. So when it came off, it was an e-ticket ride is an understatement. The tail rotor is supposed to keep the aircraft from spinning, and that low airspeeds in particular has a lot of authority over that. And we were at pretty low airspeed, as I talked about earlier. So the spin accelerated very, very rapidly. It got to the point where we were spinning in a flat spin, completely out of control, and I couldn't really see anything other than the horizon line. So I was trying to keep the aircraft from flipping upside down while Ray Frank, who is my co-pilot, was shutting the engines off, because it seems counterintuitive, but the only thing you can do in that situation is actually kill the power, and that stops the spin. But then you fall from the sky, which is what we ended up doing, and somehow impacted on the wheels, and the wheels did their thing, landing gear did its thing, and we crashed very, very hard, a lot of G-forces, but everything worked as advertised, and we all survived.
So, real quick, I just want to go right back real quick, just for my own personal edification. So when you guys were kind of operating as that, I mean, a close air asset. I mean, was somebody on the ground actually doing like Army call for fire, like aircraft call for fire or anything like that? Or was you seeing targets and engaging them just kind of on you? I mean, how does that work? Because I know like Apaches, they like, that call for fire platform, like gunships, things like that. But with Blackhawks, like, you don't really see that. It's not like the Marine Corps that treats their Hueys as a cast platform, things like that. Was that on you guys, or were guys on the ground like literally giving you call for fire?
So the Blackhawks were not getting calls for fire. The Little Birds were, because they're up more in a traditional attack helicopter profile. And I'm sure they were engaging targets on their own, but I think for the most part, they were getting calls for fire. For us, it was, acquire, engage, and do it all on our own, because we were literally, if you had to measure the diameter of that orbit that we're in, it's probably, 300 yards maybe. I mean, it's a pretty tight circle.
Yeah.
Right around the target site. So we're actually shooting out from the target site with our outboard gun. So we're trying to keep the bad guys from penetrating the perimeter. So we'd almost be right over the heads of the blocking force, I guess, and going around and then providing fires outside of their sectors.
Okay, so kind of like a hasty IP sort of kind of thing. Okay.
Yeah.
I only asked because call for fire interests me. I'm a JTAC, so it kind of falls in line. But okay, so back to the story. I apologize for going off on a tangent, but all right. So you guys crashed. You were immobilized. You were injured in the crash.
Yeah, we were all injured pretty severely. I had broken femur, broken back. I was unconscious. Ray had a broken tibia and a back injury. I don't know the full extent of it. And the crew chiefs were hurt worse than that. The seats in the front are a little bit better from a crash survivability perspective than the seats in the back. And we don't even know for sure if they got locked in. I'm sure anybody that's ridden in the back of an assault aircraft knows the crew chiefs kind of move around a little bit, and they're on monkey harnesses. And the way those work is, if you are going to crash, you're supposed to lock in, get back in your seat basically, and lock it in. I don't even know if they had a chance to do that. It was pretty violent.
Gotcha. All right. So you're on the ground. You guys are injured. I mean, at that point, this, like you had said, the battle has progressed. Like the city's now, everybody's involved in the fight now. How long until Shugart and Gordon were on scene when they were feet on the ground at the crash site?
To me, it seemed like seconds, but I think part of the explanation there is that I was unconscious for some unknown period of time. I think it's about 10 minutes. I mean, maybe less. It was pretty quick. I mean, I know the conversation went on between them and the leadership. Ultimately, as I understand it, General Garrison made the final call to put them in, or allow them to be put in. He didn't order it or mandate it. He basically gave the permission. And I think that all transpired over probably less than 10 minutes. Okay.
All right. So they reach the crash site and they pull you from the bird. So they pull everybody. That was kind of like one of those things, like everybody everybody sees the movie, things like that. I mean, how was that managed at the crash site? Getting the crew chiefs, your co-pilot, yourself out. I mean, again, that it's not really covered anywhere else. So
Right. So Ray was able to get out on his own. He, as I said, he had a tibia fracture, so he was somehow able to get himself out of the seat. And the last time I saw him, he was actually standing. I was in the right seat. He was in the left. He was standing there adjacent to the seat. We were flying doors off, so we didn't have to get the doors open. It just seems like only seconds later, Randy and Gary arrived on my side first. And it was a bit of a shock, actually. I didn't expect anybody to be there that quick. And also didn't know there were only two. So my thoughts initially are, oh, this is a rescue force. Somehow they diverted a group of assets here, and we must have crashed right next to them or something, And they were focused, as I've always said, purely on the mission and the task at hand. There was no sense of, there's a sense of urgency, but certainly no sense of panic or anything that would cause me concern. I obviously felt like they're going to load me up in a vehicle and I'm out of here. That's really the mindset that I had. And they put me on the ground. I had my MP5 already. They left me with that, and then they helped the crew chiefs out. I couldn't turn around, so I never saw the crew chiefs, but I could hear them. They were hurt bad. You could just tell by the sounds that they were probably both incapacitated. I think Tommy, who was on the left, was actually hit in the chest by his minigun. They're on a swivel mount, a pintle mount, and there's a lot of movement that allows them to shoot. And then because of the way the aircraft hit the ground, I think his gun actually hit him right in the chest. And then Bill, I'm not sure, but he was hurt pretty bad also. And then from that point on, most of the activity at the crash site was going on the other side of the bird. And I might have thought about this. I could have shared a picture, but if you look at it from the air, there's a kind of an open area on the left side of the aircraft, and I was on the right side between the aircraft and a fence, basically, is corrugated tin wall, you could say. So the access to the site was really on the opposite side, which is fortunate for me because I've got the aircrafts essentially providing cover as the mob and the civilians and everybody else kind of approached from the left-hand side. So Randy and Gary were over there with Ray, doing what they could to keep the attackers at bay. But again, they were vastly outnumbered, and it was only a matter of minutes before they could not hold out any longer.
So at that point, so they were killed. I'm trying to put this together in my head. So you were alone. How far away were you from the crew chiefs? I know you couldn't see them because you couldn't turn around, but you ended up alone when the mob came in.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Tommy was Bill, I'm sorry, was probably only 5 feet behind me. He was, I'm sure they put him on the ground right behind me, but I was laying on my back on a survival kit or something. There's a great Dietz painting for some of the folks that might have been at the compound in Bragg, and it's hanging there, and I've got a copy of it. It's pretty accurate. It shows, I'm laying on something adjacent to my seat on the ground there, and we're doing what we can to hold people at bay. I didn't touch on it, but Gary actually is hit first, and I didn't see it, but I heard him say something, and I'd flown with these guys on the aircraft before, so I didn't know them well. I didn't know them personally, but I knew they were, and I recognized his voice. And then Randy came around and asked if there were any more weapons in the aircraft, and at that point, any sense of calm that I had or confidence in this being over with was gone. And good news is the crew chiefs put their weapons where they were supposed to be. He grabbed them both, and he came on and he gave me what I believe still is Gary's weapon. And it only had a partial magazine left, and I ended up firing a few rounds, and then it ran out of rounds. And at that point, Randy called on his radio for a status, and was told, or I heard the response was that a reaction force was en route. So he went around the nose and he made his last stand, and within probably 2 or 3 minutes he went down. The volume of fire is like, it was like being at small arms range. I've read reports from the Somalis that 27 Somalis were killed at Crash Site 2. So, I mean, that's at best 4 of us shooting. It's probably me accounting for 0 and Randy and Gary accounting for 27, but Ray may have got off a few rounds also. So, I mean, if you're killing that many people, that's a lot of freaking shooting.
That's an incredible amount of shooting, especially being totally outgunned there and exposed. I mean, there wasn't really cover and concealment out there.
Right.
I mean,
right.
When I read the book, it seemed like they were utilizing the aircraft as kind of their base of fire. Whether or not that was accurate or not, I have no idea.
Yeah, well, again, I couldn't see it, but I don't know how it could be because they were on the opposite side of the bird, and that's where the attack was coming from. So they're essentially just making their last stand almost in the open, maybe behind a tree or something. But there's really nothing over there if you look at the overhead picture.
Gotcha. Well, God, listen, I've had CAG dudes on before. Everybody knows who listens or watches this podcast knows the type of metal that they're capable of and that they're made of. But from there, so Randy and Gordon are killed. You're out of ammo. He handed you the rifle. You're dry. What happens next? Is it just a case of just the crowds totally convening on your location, or what?
Yeah, and they all came from the left. And again, it's easy to envision when you see the imagery from overhead. It's the access to that area is all from that side. So that's where the whole attack came from, and it was pretty frightening. I don't feel it anymore, but I can tell you at the time, I was certain that this is it. I mean, these people just killed everybody else at this crash site. They're overrunning the site, and I'm done. That's pretty much what was in my head. It wasn't so much giving up as just sort of a realization of this is just reality. I can't hide. I can't run. I got no ammo left. I did have my M9 was still in its holster, and I cannot explain, never have been able to, why I never even pulled it out. And you know what? It could be argued it would have just got me killed. I don't know, but it wasn't a conscious decision. It wasn't don't pull that out. It was, I just never even thought of it. I was just so focused on the submachine guns. But so when they came around the nose of the bird, which was the first time I saw them, they were surprised because I think they thought they had killed everyone. And I was laying there. I had Gary's weapon across my chest, and essentially resigned myself to the fact that they were going to just beat me to death. They had done some pretty horrific things to other people in the region, and didn't expect to be treated any differently. And then, I did think back about survival school, or what they taught us in survival school about this moment, which is basically, this is the moment where it goes from, this is not a fight anymore, this is survival, right?
Yes.
And I do distinctly remember making that decision that I'm now trying to survive. This is not a fight. The fight's over. And I didn't antagonize them. I didn't John Wayne and spit in their face. I just let it go. Played possum. And it probably saved my life because, at that point, everything's so volatile. No one's going to know if, they put a bullet in my head, after they ran over the site. I mean, there's no accountability for anything like that at that point. So I actually ended up helping them get my survival gear off because our gear at the time had clips on it like a water ski vest, right? And I've always made the joke that I didn't see any Somalis water skiing, so they probably don't know how that works. So I mean, they were pulling on it, and I finally just, hey, I got this, and I unclipped it. And the thing to remember is these people have absolutely nothing, so everything is valuable to them. I mean, we had kids in the field fighting over empty plastic water bottles. I mean, it was just, so everything that I had that any person in that group could get was I don't want to go so far as to call it a treasure, but it had value, right? So, survival vest, night vision goggles, weapon, all of that stuff. So they're all clamoring for this stuff. And then there's a couple that are more interested in beating me to death, and they started to. They broke my nose, my cheekbone, my eye socket, and again, I'm still thinking it's not likely I'm making it through this, but there's nothing I can do but try to survive it. And eventually, and I actually get this information from Mark Bowden's research on Black Hawk Down. I don't remember this, but he says he interviewed a guy who fired rounds in the air and got everybody under control. And I honestly don't remember that. Now, maybe it's not true. I'm not sure. But I can tell you that things did calm down and the beating stopped, and somehow, some way, they came to the realization that I was worth more to them alive than dead, and they stopped beating me. But they continued to rip all my gear off. And at some point, I think when they were pulling on my boot, my femur went out the backside of my leg, which was, again, a miracle that didn't create a more significant issue. And then they finally got everything off of me except for my T-shirt and my desert tan two-piece flight suit bottom. That's all I had left on. And that's when they threw dirt in my face and wrapped a rag around my head and said I was going to die there, and hoisted me up in the air and carried me out.
That's a really good indicator of, you were kind of talking about the whole machismo, don't spit. And it's funny because I literally have the Special Forces Creed hanging up. And there's a line that says, "I pray that I may have the strength to spit upon my enemy." But everything you learn in SEER school is de-escalation. It's a survival game. There's no battle of wits. Look out for your mates if you're with your mates, but it's de-escalation. So that's a really good kind of, all right, here's the lore versus here it is in practice. You're beat to a pulp. You have a significant compound fracture, which that to me, your femur sticking out the back of your leg, that's a life-threatening injury. The crowd, for whatever reason, calms down, and you're bagged, you're told you're going to die here, and you're taken away. So this is the part of the story that nobody knows. What happens afterwards? What is the captivity like? So where did they take you, and what happened from there?
So, and you're absolutely right. And had I never gone to survival school, I'm not sure what I would have done. I really don't know, And I have always said I appreciate the fact that I did have the opportunity to go to Sea Level SEER there at Bragg. And actually, I think at this point, there's only 2 of us that have actually gone through that school and been held. That may have changed. Last I knew, that was the case. So obviously, they were interested in what I thought about the training. And I've always said it was part of why I survived. There's no question about it. And it does create that sort of discrepancy, I suppose, in who we identify ourselves as and then what we're taught to do. And I don't know how you reconcile that, other than, once the fight's over, and you just gotta recognize that. And as long as you're not doing, like you said, which is, doing it for your own betterment at the cost of others, then you're still living, you're adhering to whatever ethos we all share.
Well, in that ethos, I think there's definitely room for interpretation, for sure. I mean, yeah, so long you don't want to give away any information. You don't want to provide the enemy any sort of propaganda value, things like that. These are all things that are taught at the Sea Level course. But again, like I said, that machismo, the alpha type, the 160th, the SF, the CAG, the Rangers, everybody that goes through that kind of thing, they all say, yes, I pray that I had the strength to spit upon my enemy. But in practice, it is 100% about survival. I find that absolutely fascinating, because you are one of the few guys you're a SEER Level C graduate who actually went through it. Guys like me, when you go through the course, it's cerebral. It's not tangible. It's all cerebral. This is very much a what if scenario. And I mean, is it safe for me to assume when you went through the course that was your mindset too? Like, this is just a totally, it could happen, but it's such a rare chance of this, coming to fruition. Or did you go through the course and as an aviator, you were just like, that's a distinct possibility that I can be shot down and captured?
No, I don't know how everyone else felt, but I felt like there's no way this is ever going to happen to me.
Gotcha.
Not to say I didn't appreciate the training or really enjoy it. I always said it was probably outside of flight school, the second best training I ever went through. I really did. I thought it was great. But, all the stuff we learned in that short period of time, because, for me, I didn't go through the full Q course, or I didn't, go to Ranger school. So for me, that's my sort of moment to suffer like all the rest of you and hopefully become better as a result of it all. But anyway, so back to your question. So I, immediately following that being picked up and hoisted overhead moment, I've always described this very brief period of time where I actually felt like I was above looking down. And what does that mean? Well, the best explanation that I've ever had provided to me was the pain got so intense for me that my brain is trying to convince itself that this is not real. And it makes sense to me because I distinctly remembered it. And I also remembered it as though I'm an observer and not the person in the midst of all that madness. So if that is what happened, it worked. And I kind of wish it would have lasted for a little bit longer because, before I knew it, I was right back in the middle of it. But it was, you can imagine, femur fractures. You just watch them on a football field and you're like, ooh, it hurts you just to see it. And I can tell you that my femur didn't hurt anywhere near as much as my back did. And it was just excruciating. And, they don't care. They're just hauling me around like a rag doll. So it was pretty rough. And then I ended up getting, now again, this comes from Mark Bowden's interviews. He says that there was another group within the clan structure in Somalia that actually took me away from the original people who captured me. And these are rivals of Adid, okay? Now, again, I'm oblivious to all this at the time, but he says that Adid, when he found out that these people had me, then either paid a ransom or applied some kind of influence to ultimately get me back. So that accounts for a couple of moves. I end up getting moved 3 times. And, the first one was I only spent a few hours in this first place, and it was basically a tactical interrogation, right? You get these guys that they don't know how to interrogate. They don't know what they're doing. They're just basically, a pat down search and, a couple of threats, and they left me alone. And then I got thrown on the back of a flatbed truck. At least that's what it felt like. They always had a bag over my head, but it's like being on a metal flat bed, not like a pickup truck bed that's corrugated, but an actual flat piece of metal, and then like a tarp thrown over me. And then I got moved to where I would spend, I guess it would be maybe 2 or 3 days. And that was in this little octagonal building. We're thinking it's somewhere in the northeast part of the city. I don't think we ever really figured out for sure where some of these places were. But it was in the neighborhood because I could hear kids playing outside. But I was also very close to wherever the convoy traveled, because that night, after being put in this place, the convoy, which is actually trying to get to Super 6-1, comes right by my compound. And I'm thinking they've already figured out where I am. This is a rescue, because you can hear the gunshots and some of the larger projectiles. I can actually hear them flying through the air, right? And explosions all over the place. And I figured one of the observation birds tracked me with a sensor, and somehow they tracked me all the way to this location. and someone's going to bust through this door, and then the convoy just kind of passes by and keeps shooting, and the fires become distant again. It was incredible, the sort of elation or excitement or anxiety, all rolled into one, followed by disappointment, I guess, as it passed on by.
Oh my God. I can't imagine.
I mean,
that's horrifying. I did not know that was the case. That the ground extraction force literally rolled by your location.
And I mean, it was so close. Like, I'm sitting in my office in my house right now. It would be about the same distance to the street. Is how close it felt. Like they actually came right by. And again, just an interesting, trivial little coincidence, I suppose, that would indicate maybe where I was. But anyhow, and then that first night goes by. They had chained me up. But otherwise they just tossed me on this concrete floor, and I was able to get out of the chain. And they didn't chain it real tight, and I was sweating, and so I was able to get out of the chains. And it was, I don't think it's too sensitive to talk about. They talk about little victories, right? It was a little victory. I mean, it was, man, I can get the dirt out of my eyes. I can turn my leg so it's not, throbbing in pain quite as much. I can reposition myself, and oh yeah, I just got out of your chains, you idiots. It was one of those kind of moments, right? And it's sort of like at least the way the compound was set up, which I know is dramatically different now, but there was just gravel outside of your cell, and that's exactly the way it was here. And I could hear them when they came up. So I heard this gravel, and I wrapped that chain around my wrist again to make it look like I was still chained up. And the door opens, and bang, a round goes off, and it hits the floor. And then the round ends up in my left arm, and a piece of the concrete floor ends up in the backside of my broken femur leg, basically maybe 6 inches above where the femur came out. So I'm like, I don't want to make light of it, but when you get shot, it's kind of shocking that you've been shot, and you have to sort of reconcile it in your mind. And I looked down, and I could see the round is actually sticking out of my arm because all the velocity was gone after it hit the concrete. So I reached over and I grabbed it, and I burned the crap out of my fingers. And I've always kind of joked around about a lesson learned on that too, that rounds are hot. And if you are going to pull out your own bullet, you probably ought to give it a second or use some tweezers or something, because it burned the tips of my fingers when I grabbed it. But anyway, superficial wound, nothing really. Actually, the one on my leg was worse. There's still a scar there. But more psychological than anything else. No real threat to my life. And whoever it was I always said, a true coward. Didn't even show their face and ran off before they even saw what they'd failed to accomplish. And then the real guards came in after they heard the shooting, and they were like, what's going on? And I remember going like this, and I made like a gun and pointed at my arm and like, what's going on here? Can't you control your people or something like that? Sort of gesture. And they talked among themselves and just went the other way after they saw I wasn't hurt real bad. And then they started talking about making the video. And this is always the big test, I guess, or it's become more culturally part of who we are today. But again, this is 1993, so we're not quite so in tune at that point in history in the permanency of video. Right now, everyone gets it, right? I do selfies of myself in a compromising situation. It's never going away if I share that with somebody, right? So I think we have, as a culture, we understand. But then it's just a little bit different, is all I can say. But I still had this appreciation for the fact that this is a big deal, and how this gets handled is going to make a big difference, not just for me, but potentially the political situation, the tactical effort, everything, right? Because it's such power, the media and how these things are used. So again, I'm thinking back to survival school, what should I do here? And initially I went with the approach of, I'm basically not going to say anything, right? I'm just going to, they can ask away and I'll just play stupid. And then, it went on for a while, and they had a guy there with a camera, and you could tell they were getting impatient. I'm sitting up, so you can imagine it's not torture, but it's torturous to be holding your weight off of your spine when you have a compression fracture. And I finally got to the point where I was getting a little frustrated and thought, all right, I need to try plan B here. So I again thought about the way they taught us to respond to these questions, and I decided to apply the logic, and it worked flawlessly. I mean, it absolutely worked flawlessly. The things that I answered to were my name. Basically, everything that I said was written on my name tag, right? My name tag had a picture of a Black Hawk helicopter. It's got my rank on there. It's got my name. I gave them that information. They said, something about you Ranger, and I said I'm a Black Hawk pilot again, and all that's because they captured me laying next to a Black Hawk, right? I mean, you have to apply some logic here, to say, Black Hawk, what's a Black Hawk? That would be kind of stupid. So I told them that, and then they were after really the political questions, which is where it gets a little more difficult to figure out, all right, how do I reconcile this? And the two things that they had been asking over and over and over were, you kill the people innocent, and then how you think this mission in Somalia. Those are their exact words. And I've replayed that video 500 times, so I know exactly what they said. And to the first question, where they said, you kill the people innocent, I said, innocent people being killed is not good. And then they said, how do you think this mission in Somalia? And I said, I'm a soldier, I do what I'm told. And that was it. And again, it was like I applied the lessons learned, the logic and the techniques that I've been trained to apply. And in this scenario, anyway, it worked absolutely flawlessly, because they thought they had something. They had me talking on camera. They grabbed that video, ran out the door, and I'm told by CNN that they actually had the video in Atlanta within 15 minutes, and they broadcast it to 127 countries within like a half hour when it was shot, which is amazing when you think about when that was. And the one credit I'll give to CNN is that they called my parents and they said, hey, we have something, video evidence of your son's whereabouts. We're giving you a heads up. It's going to air live in about 5 minutes. We just want you to know. And of course, obviously, they turned on the TV, and they had a heads up that it was coming, and still pretty painful to watch, I'm sure. But in the end, it ended up arguably being a life insurance policy for me, because now everybody knew that I was alive. Everybody knew that they had me, and they were, whether they agreed that the Geneva Convention applies, they were going to be held to that standard either way. So it didn't feel like a good thing at the time, I can tell you honestly, but it ended up being a good thing.
So, I mean, at that point, was your family was informed by the Army that you were missing in action, I would assume?
Yes, all 6 of us, our families were, at that point, official status was MIA. Yep.
Okay. So the video released, obviously I can definitely see, because that is the worst case scenario in a POW experience. They turn the video camera on. It's either a gotcha moment. They want you to read a prepared statement, something like that. But in the end, it was just proof of life for the United States government. How did we go from, all right, I've been moved around a couple times, I'm injured, I'm now being used for potential political reasons, to your safe return back to U.S. forces?
Yeah, so after the video was shot, they moved me. There was actually a lot of people in the room for the video. One thing I found, this is really dating myself, but there was a movie from the might have been the early 70s called "The Gods Must Be Crazy," where it's like some somebody in an airplane throws a Coke bottle out the window or so. I don't even remember the movie. I just remember the story about it. And there's a tribe on the ground that this bottle falls from, and it's to them, it's like something from the gods, right? And I always felt that was sort of how I was looked at by the Somali people. You can imagine for them that the U.S. is this sort of distant, faraway land, and we're all almost aliens, right? We are so different from them. We have all this technology. We have all these things that they probably just see in bits and pieces, because you got to remember, internet really didn't even exist at the time. So, what they know of us comes to them either through maybe a VHS movie or something like that, right? So to actually have an American in your living room is sort of a very, it's definitely an anomaly, but it's almost it creates a lot of interest and attention, which is definitely not something I would have really thought about, but no question, it was like everybody wanted to come see the American, right? So when they shot the video, there was a lot of people in there. It was kind of a big moment, and Indeed realized with all that attention, somebody's going to figure out that that's what's going on. So they moved me again right after the video was shot. And I didn't mention this yet, but I did write my own book, and I wrote my own book for exactly the reason that we're having this conversation. When I went to see Black Hawk Down, which I didn't go right away, but I finally did, I walked out of the theater thinking, man, I mean, the movie ends and I'm in captivity and no one knows what happened, right? So what better opportunity than this to write a book? And I had held off. I had actually written the outline to one, going all the way back to when it first happened. And then, I think one of the things we all do honor and respect is the fact that we don't talk a lot about operational stuff, at least not when we're in it. And that's part of why I didn't do it. But now, I mean, I'm retired. This has been 10 years. This stuff is not really operationally significant anymore. Mark already was given access to everything. They made a movie out of it. I could probably tell my part of the story, and not be considered persona non grata. So I felt like the time was right, and I did, and it was, the timing was right. It was very, very sought after project, and it became a New York Times bestseller itself, actually. And the title's In the Company of Heroes, and I chose that title because that is truly how I always felt when I was an operational guy, that, we are in the company of heroes. That's just who we served with. And I've always felt this is just a tremendous honor to have ever even served, never mind in combat and in situations like this specific one we're talking about. So that, if there's interest in learning more about this part of the story, it is I'm very proud of it. It's hard to find because we sold out a couple of printings, but it's available in all formats and from any of the usual locations. So I was moved again, and as I wrote in the book, this is one situation where I thought I had a chance to escape, and they had put me in the back seat of a car, threw a tarp over me again, and now you can imagine. I don't know, I'm sure there's many folks listening who have had pretty significant injuries. The thing about ortho injuries, at least my experience, and I've had a fair number through playing sports and this and all that, is that it doesn't seem to hurt right away, and it doesn't seem to hurt necessarily when you're not moving it. But as soon as you try to move anything related to that injury, the pain just absolutely spikes, right? So when I was in that first couple of days and they weren't moving me around, it actually was tolerable, even without pain medicine. But man, as soon as you start to manipulate it, either whether it's a result of the trauma, the swelling, or whatever, the pain was ridiculous. So when they stuffed me in this car, I was hyperventilating, and the sweat was probably projectile coming out of my body because the pain was so bad. And they threw this tarp over me, and then they actually sat on me because as they're driving through the city, they don't want people to suspect that there's something in this car, right? So they're trying to act like, it's just a bunch of thugs driving through the city. And when they got to the second location, which would actually be the third location at this point, they stopped and they all got out and they left me alone. Now, the first thought is they're leaving me to get killed here. I've served their purpose. They made the video. They're just abandoning this vehicle, and someone will find me, and they're gonna, I'm gonna get killed here. So I'm trying to be quiet, and I'm kind of trying to assess the situation, and then thought about, okay, any chance they could have left the keys in the car, right? I don't know. So I start to kind of ease myself up, and my plan is, I kind of feel like I'm in the northeast part of the city. If the keys are in the car, I'm going to start this damn thing and figure out how to drive it and just head southwest, right? That's my plan. Well, never got a chance to even try to get over the seat, and they got back in the car. Apparently they had gone ahead. I speculate that they just went to pre-coordinate access to this compound. We had to go through a garage door gate kind of thing, and then get in there. And I guess they just wanted to go make sure everything was kosher before they went through. So I spent a few days there. I came up with a few more ideas there. I asked them to wash my shirt, and my reasoning was not for hygiene purposes, but I thought, all right, we got helicopters flying around. Maybe there's some remote chance they'll see this brown T-shirt hanging on a clothesline somewhere. Just anything you could come up with, right? I do characterize myself as a problem solver. I'm always trying to come up with solutions, and that was one. And I remembered trying to exercise a little bit, because I don't know, am I gonna be here 6 months? You don't know. And I'm completely immobilized, so I'm grabbing the windowsill and sort of pulling myself up, trying to get a little bit of elevation in my heart rate so I don't completely turn into jelly while I'm laying there, and just stuff like that. Try to eat and drink whatever they gave me. Again, they teach you that stuff in school. It's, you got to eat and drink, remain hydrated to survive. And then over time, what the Somalis will describe as is what the Red Cross called the reverse Stockholm syndrome. So the Stockholm syndrome, if you're not familiar with it, is when you as a captive sympathize with your captors because they indoctrinate you. The reverse Stockholm syndrome, which I've never heard of any other time than this, is when your captors start to like you and sympathize with you. And that was not a strategy. All it was is an unintended consequence of doing what they taught us to do in survival school, which is just show general respect and courtesy, right? Again, maybe the curriculum's changed. It's been 30 years since I went, but it goes back to our conversation earlier about you don't spit in their face. They're Muslim, so when it was prayer time, they were praying right in the room with me, right? If I were trying to play John, and I don't mean to pick on John Wayne, I respect the man and all his movies, but it's it's a reference we all get. If I wanted to play John Wayne, I could say derogatory things during that prayer time, but that would hit them at their very core. So that is obviously not the right thing to do. And I was respectful and I was reverent and I let them pray. And then I was given a Bible from the Red Cross, and they thought I was actually studying the Bible as well. What they didn't know is I was actually using it as a diary, and I was keeping notes in it, and I still have it. And they let me leave with it. And they never knew that I was actually keeping a log. But I chronicled everything from the moment the RPG hit the aircraft all the way until I got released. And again, it was sort of playing off their, and I respect the fact that they're very faithful people, and they showed me that same respect in kind. And it goes back to what you were taught when you were 5. If you grew up in a home like I grew up in, you treat other people the way you want them to treat you, and that's kind of how you get by in life. And it worked. And they ended up, I'll use the word liking. I mean, I didn't see that outwardly, but the Red Cross described it as absolutely. They thought that the Somalis were somewhat sympathetic and didn't want to see harm come to me. And it was like, well, that's just bonus points. I mean, if they want to help keep me alive, if their orders are to cap me when a rescue force comes, that's probably going to at least cause them to hesitate, if nothing else. And that could be enough. Yeah.
Absolutely. You're literally the walking embodiment of that entire curriculum working. And that's incredible to me. Cause like I said, all that survival training, that's all cerebral. There's nothing tangible about it whatsoever, because you don't imagine yourself in that situation. So that's fascinating to me, that curriculum, it saved your life. It really did.
More than once, I would argue, more than once for sure. And, you know, it gave you strategies. Like I've always said, I don't know what I would have done otherwise, because, you know, if you have no training and all you have is the Big Four, right? And the Big Four was great in previous conflicts, and, you know, we didn't really understand the nuances of all this, but it doesn't work. I mean, and the reason SEER School exists, as everyone knows, is because of the experiences of POWs in Vietnam, and trying to apply the Big Four, and realizing that that's just not going to work long term. I mean, it works at a tactical level in the first, you know, few minutes, but when you start, you know, getting into the various follow-on experiences that you're going to experience, you cannot rely only on that, for sure.
No, they beat you silly.
Yeah.
There's no question. They would become frustrated, and it's all about managing expectations, trying to control the narrative as best you can, but more so controlling that situation. It's easy to get into a battle of wits. It's difficult having the humility and the wherewithal to say, okay, if I do this, I might get this. If I do this, I might last another day. So that's incredibly fascinating to me. It's comforting to know that training was all worth it too, because hell, you never know. You might find yourself in a situation like that for any number of reasons.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And again, I can't say enough how much I appreciate the fact that I had the opportunity to attend the school. I do have, you know, all this has been good, but I've one screw up that I have to disclose, and you know, you could argue is innocent enough, but it didn't meet my standard, I can tell you that. So I mentioned the Red Cross. I was visited without warning by a delegate from the Red Cross, and you knew something was up because they came in and they cleaned the room. They actually gave me some fresh pajamas to put on. I had been laying on concrete for 5 days, and they brought in a nasty mattress, but it was still a mattress, and I was able to lay down on that. And I'm thinking, all right, so, you know, this is a show for something. Am I either going to get, you know, released or what? Either way, you know, it's progress, right? And all of a sudden, this Caucasian blonde woman walks in the door. She's from Switzerland, and Suzanne Hofstetter is her name, and she's there to hold my hand, basically. I mean, it was pretty powerful. It really was, because, you know, you play the tough guy and you're playing the tactical game all this time, and now all of a sudden there's this woman there that at least you think you can trust. You know, you always got to wonder. Yeah. But, you know, you think you can trust, and it was an emotional moment, because it sort of gives you that connection to the outside world, and which you sort of put in the back burner until all of a sudden there it is, and it reminds you that, you know, there is something beyond this. And anyway, she didn't have anything with her because they had not given her any notice, but she spent a few moments there, and I was able to write a letter, and I wrote a letter at home, and then I wrote a letter to the guys in the unit, and she took those. And then immediately following her, when I've just sort of gotten rattled a little bit emotionally, there's these two journalists that show up, and this is something that was never really covered in survival school, and it probably has been since, but not when I was there. All right, now what do I do? So with no warning and no time to really think about it, and I thought, okay, this is an opportunity for me to use this. So I decided it would be to my advantage to explain what happened, essentially recreating our conversation today. I'm going to tell you what happened from the moment the RPG hit the aircraft all the way through this moment in time, and how, you know, what could possibly be bad about that, right? That's should give intel and information, and at least situational awareness to the command and anybody that might be pondering or planning a rescue attempt. And again, at this point, there's still 6 MIA, right? So it's just not me. It's not just me at this point. So we go through all that, and they're taking their notes, and I'm getting comfortable with talking, and that's where you got to be careful. Is when you get comfortable with talking, and
The most dangerous interrogator is the friendly interrogator.
yes, absolutely, and they slipped in the money shot, which is so what do you think about how this is how things are going here? And just without even thinking, I said, well, something's gone wrong here, and it's innocent enough, and you'd have to be a complete moron to not realize something had gone wrong there. I mean, it started out as a relief operation, and then it was a security operation, and now it's turned into basically a combat zone, which is never intended. And but I still felt I had crossed a line that I shouldn't have crossed. And as soon as the words came out of my mouth, I screwed that up. Yeah, I'm gonna get debriefed. Yeah, I'm gonna get debriefed on that one, right? And I beat myself up on it pretty good. I mean, for a couple of days, I was really, really upset with myself. In the end, you got to also realize I don't know what's going on outside, right? I don't even know that there's been multiple aircraft shot down. I don't know there's 18 killed. I don't know about the scope of this battle. When I got shot down, we had lost one bird, but that was it. So, I'm missing a big part of the equation here and how much attention is being put on this thing. So I don't really recognize the fact that, I mean, this thing is dominating the news at this well, it probably wasn't coronavirus level, but I mean, it was dominating the news. There was not much else going on at the time. And anyway, I didn't uphold the standard that I felt I should have. And now was I overly critical? Yeah, you'd argue either way. But anyway, the lesson learned is what you just alluded to, is someone who really knows how to interrogate is going to get you into that position, and that's when you're going to potentially say something that you might not have said otherwise.
Oh man, that's the truth.
Yeah.
The beatings you can take.
Yeah.
The beatings you can take. It's when they start playing games.
Yeah.
That's when it becomes most difficult. All right, so let's finish off with your release. How did that go down? I mean, what was it? Did it seem official? Did it seem nuanced? Did it seem like they were just giving up? I mean, what were your impressions there?
So I got a radio. They actually asked me about a radio. They gave me a radio, and I was listening to things going on. The president had sent the former ambassador to Somalia back into country, and so I felt that added credibility to the fact that they were saying that I was going to be released. But I also tried not to get my hopes up too high. And when the day actually came, I played it the way I played everything else, with caution. The guy said he was a Red Cross doctor. I assumed it was true, but didn't automatically believe him. He had morphine, and that's when I became more of a believer. That he gave me a shot of morphine right there in captivity, and then from there it was stick me in the back of a vehicle and get me to the compound. And at that point, I saw people I knew, and I knew at that point it was over.
My God, like I said, you're one of the few POWs since Vietnam. I mean, Vietnam was really the last conflict we saw actual POWs, POW stories, lessons learned, things like that. But that was different. That was, even though it was very much an unconventional war, it was very much a POW experience. You kind of found yourself in the middle, between like that whole hostage versus POW scenario. And I got to give you props, because that's difficult to maneuver. You're supposed to act different in each scenario. And you kind of had to skirt that line. So that's incredible. So Chief, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story. I learned a lot, because I'll be the first to admit I had not read your book yet. It's definitely the next thing I do read, because I think it is an important story. And like you and I had said before we started recording, I mean, this is kind of a segment that gets put on the back burner. I mean, there was a lot going on that day, like you said, the 18 KIA, you had dozens wounded. You had all this going down. You had birds going down. You had Medal of Honor worthy actions. You had Distinguished Service Cross worthy actions. So it's one of those stories that kind of unfortunately gets lost in the shuffle. And I'm so glad you were able to sit down, take the time, and educate myself and others about that, because it is important. And that's why I've always found it. Whenever I do these interviews with like these amazing service members, they have these stories that just, in the grand scheme of things, get forgotten or pushed aside, things like that. And so it's important to bring those back to the forefront. So, Chief, can't thank you enough. And I'm sure you've been told it a million times, but welcome home.
I appreciate that very much, Nick. And thanks for allowing me the venue to share the story and plug in the book. It is a great book. People will enjoy it if they go out and grab it. I've always said Black Hawk Down is the second best book about Somalia ever written. So prove me right and go read it. I hope you enjoy it.
Absolutely. That's on my list of things. The book is In the Company of Heroes by Chief Warrant Officer Mike Durant. Guys, do yourself a favor. Go get the book. It's too easy. It's on. I'm imagining it's a ebook format too, electronic book.
It is. I actually read it, so you'll actually get to hear my voice for hours on end.
Wow, fantastic! You guys can even do the audiobook version. Oh man, Chief, can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for taking the time, and take it easy.
All right, take care. My best to all of you.
Thank you.